So the title for what I wanted to talk about today was what we bring to the table. And before we get to that part, a little preliminary stuff. And what I've been thinking about is where our practice really becomes important is when we take it off the cushion. We're here for about a little over an hour on Saturdays. Hopefully we sit each morning. Some of us sit for an hour, maybe longer. But the huge preponderance of our time is spent not on the cushion. And of all of that time, a big chunk is spent on our livelihood. When I was originally thinking of, a right livelihood, my thoughts were, am I engaging in a livelihood that is not harming anyone else? Either directly or indirectly. By that I meant, are we doing something that, depends on other people not being properly compensated for what they do? And how can we affect that? Which I think is really important. But there's a lot more to it than that, where we get so identified with the way that we earn our livelihood that it's sometimes difficult to see where there is dukkha, where there is, other than dukkha, that livelihood, that work that we do takes on kind of a life of its own, and it really takes us over. So that it is difficult to see what's there, to see the difference between our experience and the reality of what's there. And that's what I want to talk about, what we bring to the table. We can bring our practice there in a number of ways. One, except with very few exceptions, a large part of the time that we are there at work, we're engaging with other people. We're engaged with other people we work with. And sometimes that can be difficult, contentious. We wind up having maybe the same argument or the same feelings about, people that we work with day after day after day. And that becomes like a habit. Sometimes when we have to interface with clients or customers, that can be stressful. There's some conflict maybe between the demands of the job and what that person on the other side of the counter or, in the other chair opposite us wants, and how they express that and how we relate to them about it. How we deal with maybe hazards at the job. People who are in healthcare right now are facing a lot of physical hazard. People who are in maybe food production are facing a lot of hazards. My personal experience with that is that, I do volunteer with the VA, and I go to the VA and there are these big banners, heroes work here. And I see that at Yale New Haven at the hospital, these big banners, heroes work here. And they're talking about doctors, nurses, orderlies, everyone who's there working. But then I see that those people aren't being really valued. They've reduced the number of people who are available to do the work that needs to be done, and they've piled more work onto those people who are still there frequently. People who are there may not have adequate protection for themselves in dealing with people who might be contagious, or they might be risking, endangering those people. Financial compensation may not be adequate. Particularly, we see that in agriculture. So we may be seeing people who are harmed, or we may be being harmed ourselves. And that's something we frequently don't see because of that identification with the job. You know, this is what I do. We don't see the suffering. And that is what we can bring to the table, is our ability to see that. And also our ability to react differently. When we're in that difficult situation with another employee, and you know we're having that same problem over and over again. We're having that same problem with our supervisor. Can we see that we are suffering, and can we see a way to change that? Maybe there's no way that we can change the dynamics of the relationship, but we can change how we relate to it. We do have choices. We almost always have choices. And it's up to us to notice that we have choices, first of all, and then to see what they might be, and then finally to act on them. And all three of those need to happen for us to be effectively bringing our practice, into the workplace. We have opportunities here that we may not realize. For a long time, I was a jeweler. That's one of the many things that I've done as a livelihood. And initially, I worried a lot about there being blood diamonds, about the way gold is mined, and did what I could to educate people about that and to help steer away from areas where I thought that might be prevalent. Then I realized that when I'm sitting with people, and the work I did was I was designing and making one-of-a-kind pieces for people who would come in with maybe something they'd inherited, or there might be an occasion. Frequently, there were engagement rings. That was a big part of what I did. And people would come in either singly or together and want to discuss that. And there were frequently strong emotional feelings about that. Sometimes very positive, sometimes kind of negative. And there was of necessity, I was involved in that. There were discussions with people who were like really happy, and people who I thought needed to go home and have a fight rather than sit here, deciding on an engagement ring. Wedding rings were the same thing. People had made a commitment and now wanted to celebrate that with wedding rings, and I got to participate in that. Sometimes people would come in with something they had inherited, and there were emotional feelings about that. Mom might have passed and left them her engagement ring, or significant jewelry that she loved, that they wanted to honor but wanted to change. Because I was in the business for so long, I quite frequently was working with the third generation of customers. People would come in, older customers who wanted me to do some repairs on their jewelry, and they brought in their granddaughters or grandkids or their own kids and introduced them. And then as those kids grew up a little bit, they were getting engaged and married, and I was working with them, and then kids that they would have. So over 20 some odd years, that was a lot of people to see and a lot of change. I had several unusual ones. I had one, a customer who was an elderly woman who came in with teeth from her child, the baby teeth. And that child had died very young, and she had been holding on to those for years and wanted to incorporate them into a piece of jewelry somehow. And through discussions with her sister, she felt that maybe that was really in poor taste and she shouldn't do it. But she she was very attached to the idea of doing something with them that would be a permanent reminder for her. So we sat and talked and eventually came up with something that she felt comfortable with. And, we were able to go ahead and make something that enabled her to hold those things close to her. And that felt really rewarding. So we have the choice of how we relate to folks who come in there. It can be just a job that we sit and do, or it can be much more rewarding for all concerned. Another aspect that I wanted to talk about that is there a point where it's enough? We do get compensated for what we do, hopefully. And I think sometimes it never occurs to us that there's a point where we've done enough, where we have enough, and we can stop doing that or modify the way that we do it. That is something that's really worth considering. The job that I did for a long time and liked it, but wanted to spend a lot more time on inner life. I was at a retreat, and that's where I realized that I had enough. I could be fine if I stopped doing that. Came off of the retreat, went into work, and gave my notice the next day. And I was able to put a lot more time into the inner life.